Welcome to Meristem Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, despite the chilly forecast, we're already gearing up for planting season and the unexpected challenges it brings. We talk about carbon to nitrogen ratios, the carbon penalty, and what can be done with fertilizers and Meristem products to alleviate slow growth in the spring. And hear about our concerns on winter wheat survival and how green up is right around the corner.
Hi, this is Joe Meristem. Welcome to Meristem Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars. We have Ben, Dylan, and Lynn, and Ben's going to start.
Yeah, I wanted to touch base, we're thinking about all of the things that happen, when we get planting starting to roll here, and that feels like a long way away when it's forecast for next week's going to be negative, 10 for lows and 5 for highs, but the weather is going to turn, and it usually turns pretty quick.
Perfect cabin weather.
Yeah, it is perfect cabin weather. I've seen a lot of Snapchats this week of guys that are having lots of fun, lots of calves in bathtubs.
That's why the cattle market's so strong, because not many people can stomach that kind of work anymore.
That's definitely tough work. But one of the things that we talk about every year, and I wanted to address, is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So, and some of the things we can do to help fix the carbon to nitrogen ratio, because a lot of what people see when they see their ugly soybean stage or their ugly corn stage is simply that we don't have enough heat, or we don't have the nutrition in the right spot to get that corn crop to continue growing, or that soybean crop to sit in that ugly duckling stage when it sits still for so long. So what the carbon to nitrogen ratio is it's what it is. It's the ratio of carbon to nitrogen in that soil, and different crops have different ratios. So products like rye straw or wheat straw have an 82:1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. The ideal microbial environment is 24:1. And a common one that you would have in here as well would be corn stovers of 57:1. So what that means is that the microbial diet is scavenging as much of the nitrogen that is out in that soil as possible, and it's tying that nitrogen up when you're in a high carbon to nitrogen ratio. So when that microbial diet is trying to break that carbon down, use that nitrogen as energy, it's not allowing for the plant to get to the key nitrogen that it needs. So what are some of our options, and what are some of the things that we see?
Ben, I got a question.
Shoot.
What exactly makes up the carbon in the soil? Is it the what we call trash, or the residual? I mean, what is it? What is the carbon that you're trying to break down?
Yes, it's essentially stover. It is the things in the cell walls that are harder to break down. It's not like the things in the pith. The pith of a corn crop has a way lower carbon to nitrogen ratio than what like the outside rind of what that corn stalk is. So the stuff that's left over that has to be broken down naturally is what carbon.
That carbon source.
Yep, that is that carbon source. So that's why when we talk about corn on corn situations, there's typically an additional 40 pounds of nitrogen that we are shooting for to even out this carbon to nitrogen ratio, because the microbes in the soil are working hard at degrading the carbon that's there, and it allows for immediate tie-up of the nitrogen, which is the energy source for the microbe, to break that down. So we're trying to avoid having these high to carbon to nitrogen ratios.
We have essentially an underground tug-of-war match going on between the plant and the microbes.
Yep.
For the N.
Yep. You're exactly correct. So what are some of the ways that we traditionally have done things, and what are some of the ways that moving forward we're doing things a little bit different with balancing that tug-of-war that you're talking about? In the past, we mobile board plowed. We introduced oxygen to the system. In the fall, we buried the crop, allowing for more exposure and more what's the word I'm looking for? There's more microbes per square inch on that when it's in the ground rather than when it's exposed on top of the ground. There's not a lot of moldboard plows that are out there anymore. There's more and more no-till that's happening. That's why I see we have more of these, not stunted, but like plants that aren't growing rapidly because they're working through this tie-up. So I believe that, you know, we have a bunch of different ways that we can kind of combat some of these slowdowns that happen. You know, we have stalk digesters that are out there on the market right now. Those have been proven to have pretty high return on investment, taking the nutrition that's in the stalk and adding extra biological products out there to break those stalks down and return that fertility back into the ground. I think we're going to see a bigger play on starters as we move forward. I think there's more and more guys that I've talked to, even in this county. I know there's like 5 or 6 guys that are going back to putting starter on because they are seeing some of this delayed growth patterns happening. So I think you're going to be seeing a little bit more of the starter market happening, where you put that nitrogen right next to where that plant needs it. Also, phosphorus is pretty key in that area as well. Purdue talks about, and that's another thing that I have on my list here, is Purdue talks about AMS, or ammonium thiosulfate, going in with your burn down passes, and how key that is to getting positive return on investment for soybeans, because it's not just nitrogen is the only thing that's being tied up by this microbiome. You're getting phosphorus tie-up, you're getting sulfur tie-up, you're getting nitrogen tie-up, and all of those things are extremely important when it comes to early vegetative growth and getting that crop off to a good start.
Absolutely. You know, ATS has been more and more prevalent around here and being used in a burn down situation, but some of it goes back to not necessarily using it for the biology. It's more as like a weed and feed for the weed, that it makes that plant uptake that anything that you got that winter annuals, makes that plant uptake that herbicide a little bit faster because we're feeding it, and then we get some burn down, and then that's to be returned back to the crop. But this is a situation where there is a very good unintended consequence in that we are then providing our growing crop with potential to have some extra nitrogen or sulfur.
Right.
So you're using 120026 for that process then?
Or dry AMS, depends on how your system's set up. Some guys don't have the ability to, or the desire to put ammonium thiosulfate in because there's some antagonism with different herbicides.
Or they just don't like running nitrogen through their sprayer.
Correct. And other guys already have a fall dry program incorporated into their farm, so adding 100 pounds, and it's really about what they're looking for. Adding 100 pounds of AMS gets you that 20 to 30 pounds of nitrogen and sulfur, and that's enough to help break down this carbon and nitrogen penalty that you see in corn and soybeans.
So when would that be applied, Ben?
Typically that would be applied early April, whenever you're doing your burn down pass or your spring fertility pass, when things are fit and ahead of planting. Purdue and Brandt both have studies on this carbon to nitrogen ratio when it comes to doing, you know, regenerative ag is a hot button, or a headline that gets used a lot, where a lot of people are using cover crops in their system as well. And with the addition of a stalk breakdown product added with a nitrogen and a sulfur source, they can actually get above and beyond that carbon penalty to where they can get a positive return on investment running cover crops, no-till, into corn and soybeans. So that penalty, the carbon to nitrogen penalty that you get when you're using cover crops is extremely detrimental, and that's the reason some guys will go to no-till or some guys will go to cover crop and they won't go back, because they saw yield losses when compared to the programs that they were running before. So I think these things are important that we know, or that we, as we continue to learn about them, that there are ways around some of the penalties that have traditionally been seen by no-tilling or using cover crops. And the way to do that is to get the right amount of nutrition on ahead of time to help alleviate this carbon penalty that we see.
Okay.
So I thought that was an interesting topic. I ran across it a couple different times. We have products available through the Meristem that would help with stalk breakdown. We have products within the Meristem system that are starter related, to get that plant a little bit of nitrogen and phosphate to get things started off. I think that our hopper throttle planter box solution is an excellent option by getting, you know, zinc right in the furrow where it needs to be, along with nitrogen fixing bacteria or nitrogen solubilizing bacteria, along with phosphate solubilizing microbes. And I think this is where things are headed, and this is where things are trending. And a couple of the Meristem products are going to be very advantageous when it comes to not only the carbon penalty, but the pushing crops to get them planted earlier, because we know that when crops are planted a little bit earlier, like in our geography, more times than not, if you have an April planted crop where the conditions may be a little bit cooler than what guys like, you can defend yourself by having the right amount of fertility out there, or the right amount of organisms that are going to get fertility into the crop that you need.
I think one of the points that it's probably on one of the first ones that we tagged Peter in on the back of the episodes, but when he was talking about some of the stock digesters and whatnot, but the most readily available form of NPK that the plant can have is already in that stover. It's just a matter of getting it into out of the stover and into the soil where the microbes are able to introduce that back to the biome, basically. But that's something that's very unrecognized, I guess, when it comes to that. Something that we don't think about as ag producers maybe is that you know, there is a pretty good amount of fertility out there that we have to get the timing right. And that's the problem with some of this stuff, is we can do everything right on our end, but Mother Nature doesn't cooperate and give us the conditions. We might not necessarily get that at the right timing, but it's definitely an idea and a philosophy that we have to continue to work on and try to be most efficient. Back to like the 4R, you know, the 4R processes to what you're talking about on that. I mean, it is, you know, you can go in and, you know, blow on ATS or AMS and say it didn't work, but some of it has to do a little bit with timing. Like you said, if you go and blow AMS on in December and there's nothing really going on and nothing's at play, you're probably not going to see a great ROI related to that. But when you go in April time frame, or even you go back to maybe in the fall and try to get that process where we got a little bit of heat, a little bit of rainfall, and let that stuff get to work, then it could be pretty successful for you. So
basically the bacteria, the bugs, or whatever you want to call them, they got to be alive and working, as opposed to sleeping when it gets cold.
Yeah. To your point about the cover crops and wheat stover and all that, you know, right now talking to a few individuals with their wheat stands, this year's a pretty unique year for us to the north. Or I shouldn't say unique to what we had last year. We're not experiencing as much snowfall as we've had in last year. So what basically happened, we had a very large snowfall event followed by a really cool period of time. And what happened is that snow essentially becomes an insulating barrier into that wheat in the ground. So once that snow came off, then last year, really in a large demographics of our audience, we really didn't have frost in the ground, or very, very minimal. This year, we're not, well, our guys maybe in middle Missouri, not so much, but from there, I-70 north, we haven't really seen that much snow accumulation. And then now we're getting into what Ben said, some pretty negative temperatures. So Ben, just I guess explain to us a little bit, or explain to the audience on why we're a little bit more nervous on wheat stands or cover crop stands coming into this spring than maybe we were last year.
Wheat has a lot of lives, so there are growers out there that are a little bit more concerned because we don't have any cover, and we've seen sub-zero temperatures, and we're going to see more sub-zero temperatures. But the good thing about wheat, when wheat is planted on time, like let's say end of September, beginning of October, when the maximum yield is being set, in that time frame is really when wheat should be planted. When it goes in the ground, it has the ability, just like alfalfa or any other crop, it has the ability to produce as many assimilates as it can get and push them back into the root system. So when green up time frame happens, it's got plenty of energy to pop back from that instance. And planting depth is important too when it comes to frost. freeze tolerances.
Yeah, the shallower the worse. An inch and a half is ideal.
Yeah, you really don't want that crown exposed to really, really cold conditions. So I'm not all that concerned about it. There might be some November planted wheat mid, and there's not very much of it because of the fall that we have, but if there's some mid-November, really late November planted wheat, yeah, we might see some killing freezes here. But basically that wheat plant has to survive these cold temperatures, and it does that by using the assimilates that are in the roots, because there's no photosynthesis happening, because the foliage is dormant, it's burnt off, there's no green left. So the bigger the assimilate pool that you have in the root system, the more likely you are going to survive these cool conditions. And I don't know, we're probably every bit of 2 weeks in this, 2 weeks if not 3 weeks in this climate before we're going to see green up. That's probably going to happen 2 to 3 weeks earlier in the south, where they either have snow cover or aren't experiencing the same temperatures that we're experiencing now. But this green up time frame and stand establishment time frame is going to be right around the corner once we start to see temperatures get back into the 40s.
And one thing we talked about right before airing here, or recording, was we haven't had necessarily the heavy amounts of moisture in the ground, large rain events, that we're not experiencing basically a freeze that's very wet soil conditions. So not saying that a drought is ever good, but going into a drought with wheat is probably a little bit better than having massive amounts of rainfall, or going through periods of rainfall, freeze. We can have some detrimental effects to that.
In the 12 years that I've been paying attention working at Meristem Seeds, the year that we lost a lot of our production, we received 2 to 3 inches of rain and it froze off, like basically turned into a skating rink on our flat production fields. And that was a disaster for that wheat, because it basically shut off all oxygen. Ice
is terrible. That's the worst thing you can have for wheat.
Right. So wheat has 9 lives. It's an extremely tough crop. If planted on time, it's hard to get winter kill. You are correct. Having a little bit of moisture in the ground is important, because I think they have issues over in Kansas where they can get winter kill when they're super arid, and that's because the ground temp gets so much colder when there's no moisture in it, because moisture is actually it's a buffering agent, I suppose you could say, it's a buffering agent. It doesn't allow for the temperatures to swing as fast. So when you're in super arid conditions like the high plains, you don't really want dry and cold at the same time, but we're not in those same climates.
For sure. So. And mentioning 9 lives on wheat, we have seen over the last couple of years, even at green up, some stands that are maybe, I wouldn't say nauseating, but you're just like, I don't know if I would sell more than 40. The one that we were talking about before recording went for over 100. So it's very important with wheat to obviously get out and scout, but two, don't give up on it too early, because there's some management techniques that we can do to help that, especially if we have a thin stand.
Yeah, so we know green up is a pretty critical time with wheat, and like what Ben was saying, it's going to come. It might not seem like we have all these cold temperatures right now, but before we know it, the wheat's going to turn pretty dang quick. We need to be ready for it. So that's when, like, the management practices that we bring in, like splitting up our nitrogen applications, I think is going to be huge. Even no matter what kind of situation you're in, there's multiple kind of articles about splitting your nitrogen applications, and the bushels may vary a few according to articles, but they always see a very big positive ROI on splitting up your nitrogen at your green up stage, and then later at your joining stage. And so those are 2 critical times, as we're kind of starting to green up. We want to make sure we get it on at a good time too, so we don't start burning the wheat, because that can also hurt. So if, like, we're talking about maybe some of these fields that have a little bit lower stand, that's where we need to up our nitrogen a little bit more up front, and then as it starts to joint, when we come back for our second pass with like stream bars or something of that site, then you come back a little bit less to finish out with whatever your goal of nitrogen is. And then it's the exact opposite. If your wheat came up good, it was early, early planting days, it's starting to a really good stand, and the tillers are starting. That's where maybe we can back off early, and then try and finish it as it's starting to joint and really take off.
You want to feed the grain, not the straw.
Yep.
So in nitrogen at green up encourages tillering. So just like you said, Dylan, if you got a little thinner stand, you put more nitrogen on to encourage that tillering. Basically 1 head per square foot is a bushel of wheat. So you need, if you have a thin stand, you need that plant to tiller. And so you put more nitrogen on. But if you put too much nitrogen on early, you're going to get excessive growth and you're going to have standability problems, and that usually leads to less yield.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. When you're talking about these high management yield, I think we really need to make sure we are using a palisade application. And that way we can make sure we can keep feeding the wheat, and we can get, it shortens up the plant a little bit. Well, that's going to help with standability. If you're trying to push wheat, that's the number one thing I would say kind of guys run into. Wheat gets a little heavy on its top end and wants to go down. So another thing too, before Ben can add anything else, I think sulfur is a big thing too that we need to keep adding, maybe 10, 15 pounds over each pass, because it's just like corn. It's going to respond to sulfur, and we've seen that grow a lot these last couple of years, and I think that's going to continue to grow.
So sulfur stabilizes the nitrogen too, so it doesn't leach away. It's a good stabilizer too.
So 100 bushel wheat crop takes 24 pounds of sulfur total to raise that crop. 10 pounds of it is in the grain. So you are correct. If you haven't been applying sulfur because you're in a wheat soybean double crop rotation or whatever that is, sulfur is extremely important to grass crops like wheat. So getting that sulfur out there is definitely a good thing.
Very good.
100 bushel wheat crop also takes 116 pounds of nitrogen in the grain, 70 in the stover. So let that organic matter feed a little bit, but you're definitely, if you're shooting for a 100 bushel wheat crop, you better be planning on having 100 pounds of actual product out there.
I think it's a great point, because especially when we talk our hyper earlies, as we're getting earlier maturity in more northern environments, as we come into the peak organic matter breakdown period, we just don't have as big of a window as, say, a much more fuller season a little bit further south, just because of the variances in temperature and just getting that process going.
Right.
Yeah, and then I think too, when you are trying to come up with this plan, I think it's good to have it kind of set in stone, I would say, because if you don't know if you're going to try and do everything up front, and then we don't know what the weather's going to do or how good the wheat looks. So if you're going to try and plan for 2, that second pass is going to be pretty critical to do, because once it starts to joint, you start running over, it's not going to come back. So it's going to start looking like a straw on those joints. So that's how we know we can try and get ahead of that.
Yep. One of the ways that wheat will compensate, and I think it's one of the changing things that has happened in the breeding behind the wheat, is it's not uncommon to have 1,000. It's not uncommon to have 10,000 seeds per pound. We used to get away, a lot of our seed production would be 90 pounds to the acre is what we would suggest, and I think that's like 5,000 seeds per pound. A lot of our wheat and our super high yielding lines requires 150 pounds per acre now to get to 1.5 million, and that's because of our seed size of what we're producing.
And that's where the yield's coming from.
Right. I've seen as large as 9,000 seeds per pound, which would require like 166 pounds per acre to be applied to reach your 1.5 million.
Yeah, and we have farmers push back on that when they look at the seeding rate with this large seed, but they don't realize that that's why it yields so much, because it's big seed. So we can't have small seed for you to plant and then big seed for you to harvest. We haven't figured out how to do that yet. So realistically, big seed, big yields is what you should be thinking about. You should be buying your seed based on seed size, the largest wheat seed you can find, because that means it's going to produce very large seed, which is going to equate to high yields.
Right. Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Anything else? Okay. Rather than dispense with the corny joke, we had a death in our family Actually on February 3rd, my sister Kathy, my oldest sister, and if you're not familiar with our family, I'm the middle child. I had 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. And Kathy had a debilitative brain disorder. It's a kind of a form of dementia. She'd been fighting it for quite a while. You know her husband and you know her son, that's John McKillop, who retired from Meristem Siege. He actually retired a little bit earlier than he probably wanted to, but it was to take care of my sister as she was starting to degrade. And Brian McKillop, as you know, works in the logistics and in that area. Kathy was a school teacher, just loved teaching. She taught for many years in the Fort Madison Catholic school system, preschool. Prior to that, I know John, when he graduated from college, he took a job with Sears and was a traveling auditor, and then eventually became a store accountant manager, you might say. He graduated from the University of Iowa with an accounting degree. And then back in 1977, when I started into the company, my dad and I said, we need to have a controller, we need to have a good accountant. So we recruited John to come back to the business, and that's how they moved back to this area. But Kathy was my boss for quite a few years as a board of directors. And one of the things that I give her a lot of credit for was that she supported me on the program for what we call the easy order system and our accounting, our inventory management system. And back then, when I was trying to sell that to the board, it was $1 million software upgrade for our system. And that was hard for, at that time, my other brothers and sister to accept. But Kathy supported me, and we got it through. And now today, we have the most progressive inventory management system in the seed industry, as well as order system. And because of that, we offer the no substitution guarantee on corn, which no other company, to my knowledge, in the industry does that. So she was very instrumental in helping that get through. And we definitely miss her, and I just wanted to say a little bit about her. Well, we hope you enjoyed the show today. We sincerely appreciate your business. I hope your family is safe and healthy. We'll see you next week.